Hold this, Kirk. Behold the atheist's nightmare. The banana and the hand are perfectly made one for the other. Now, if you go to the top of the banana, you'll find, as with the soda can makers, they placed a tab at the top. So God has placed a tab at the top. When you pull the tab, the contents don't squirt in your face. Notice it has a point at the top for ease of entry. It's just the right shape for the human mouth. And it's even curved toward the face to make the whole process so much easier. Seriously, Kirk, the whole of creation testifies to the genius of God's creative hand.
It absolutely does.
In 1925, the creation versus evolution debate graced the national stage when it was argued in court by two celebrity lawyers in a trial so spectacular and intense that it culminated in the death of the technical winner, a death long speculated to have occurred due to stress-induced heart attack. The media circus of the Scopes trial later lent itself to fictionalized versions of the saga in plays, movies, and books. It remains a pivotal moment in pop culture, law, and religious history alike. What brought the country to this boiling point, and why is this still such a subject of controversy among the fundamentalists of today? Hi, I'm Andy, and my pronouns are they, them. Welcome to Morning Thoughts, an Assigned Christian at Birth podcast. Today on the pod, I'm going to be covering a topic that played a huge role in my personal deconstruction, evolution versus creationism, aka the monkey business of it all. I'm so glad you're here watching this podcast today. Religious trauma is a burden no one should be forced to bear alone. If you've made it out, I'm so happy you're here. If you're questioning, I'm ecstatic that you were brave enough to listen to the information I've learned since leaving Christianity. It really is a brave thing to interrogate what you've been told your entire life, especially when you were raised in a bubble that shaped you to not ask those questions. Today's topic is the evangelical fundamentalist obsession with the evil of evolution. Let's get into it. Earlier in 1925, teaching evolution had been banned in Tennessee public schools due to the campaigning by Christian fundamentalists who held the reductive view that the theory of evolution means that man comes from monkeys. While those not raised within the confines of fundamentalism found and continue to find this laughable, those inside the bubble, particularly those raised inside it from birth, have heard this rhetoric repeated by people, most often men, in positions of spiritual authority from the pulpit to the home to Christian school. It becomes fact in the same way 2 + 2 = 4 is fact. Current Speaker of the House Mike Johnson is a proud Southern Baptist fundamentalist with ties to the New Apostolic Reformation, an interdenominational movement that seeks to promote the Seven Mountain Mandate, a platform for Christian dominionism. Those who participate in this belief system endeavor to see evangelical fundamentalists take over positions of power in the 7 spheres of society: family, religion, education, media, entertainment, business, and government. Johnson even flies the Seven Mountain Mandate flag outside of his office. Advertising allegiance to Christian dominionism in any workplace, let alone the United States government, is a wild move. I guess it's not all that wild, though, for someone who correlates the plague of gun violence in schools since the 1990s with evolution being taught in our public schools. In a Rolling Stone article entitled "New House Speaker Blamed School Shootings on Teaching Evolution and Abortion," Nikki McCann Ramirez writes, "Johnson's religious fundamentalism has been a hallmark of his life and career. He's advocated for the return of prayer in public schools, derided the so-called separation of church and state on the House floor, and argued that the nation's founders did not establish the separation to prevent religion from influencing government, but rather to impede the government from restricting the influence and free exercise of religion." Prior to his political career, Johnson worked in a legal capacity for Ken Ham's Ark Encounter, and in a conversation with Ham, Johnson was quoted as saying, "The Ark Encounter is one way to bring people to this recognition of the truth, that what we read in the Bible are actual historical events." As an attorney, Johnson helped Ken Ham secure millions in state tourism subsidies, and also defended the Ark Encounter's right to discriminate based on religion while hiring. As we can see, this man is committed to living out his antiquated belief system. He's been publicly associated with young earth creationism for quite some time, an evangelical movement that purports the earth to be only 6,000 years old, based on when they believe the events of the book of Genesis and the Tanakh took place. It's because of this belief that Johnson is squarely in the anti-evolution camp, and that makes sense to me. What doesn't make sense is the way he must have pulled several muscles while stretching to link the teaching of evolution to gun violence in schools. And just when did he make this claim? During a sermon he preached in 2016, Johnson said, "And people say, How can a young person go into their schoolhouse and open fire on their classmates? Because we've taught a whole generation, a couple generations now of Americans, that there's no right or wrong. It's about survival of the fittest, and you evolve from the primordial slime. Why is that life of any sacred value? Because there's nobody sacred to whom it's owed. None of this should surprise us. This rhetoric shows us that Johnson believes the teaching of evolution means teaching no morals, destroying the ideas of right and wrong, and holding no value for life. Why does Johnson believe this? Because the text that he believes to be the truthful documentation of how this world was created was written many thousands of years before science proved it wrong. Of course, there are other religions that claim to be the one true religion that also have well-known fundamentalist factions. But we're here to specifically talk about Americas today. In the United States, fundamentalism with a capital F was established in the late 1800s and early 1900s as a reaction to liberal Christianity, which was focused more on social justice and Christ's call to love others. Go figure. They were also standing in opposition to cultural modernity. At the heart of fundamentalism is biblical inerrancy, the belief that the Christian Bible is without error in regards to both science and faith. There is no room to consider otherwise, as their deeply held beliefs position God as the creator of all life and uphold the Bible not only as both completely accurate historical and scientific fact, but also as a roadmap for the way they believe everyone should live their lives. Without a doubt, Mike Johnson is not only committed to living his own life by this roadmap, but will also do everything in his power to try and make the entire country do the same via government policy. How did we get here? Between 1910 and 1915, a series of 90 essays called The Fundamentals, A Testimony to Truth, was published by the Testimony Publishing Company of Chicago after being funded by Lyman and Milton Stewart, brothers and wealthy dispensationalist Presbyterian businessmen. First published in 12 quarterly volumes, it was then republished in 1917 by the Bible Institute of Los Angeles as a 4-volume set. The wiki page on the Fundamentals says that the volumes defended Orthodox Protestant beliefs and attacked higher criticism, liberal theology, Romanism, socialism, modernism, atheism, Christian Science, Mormonism, Millennial Dawn, otherwise known as the Russellites, but who later split into actually the Jehovah's Witnesses, spiritualism, and what it called evolutionism. According to its foreword, the publication was designed to be a new statement of the fundamentals of Christianity. However, its contents reflect a concern with certain theological innovations related to liberal Christianity, especially biblical higher criticism. It is widely considered to be the foundation of modern Christian fundamentalism. There were many years throughout my slow disentanglement from and deconstruction of evangelical fundamentalism where I believed evolution could be compatible with the Bible, and there are many people who continue to believe this as part of their personal worldview. Maybe what science understands as the Big Bang was actually God's first moment of creation. Maybe each day in creation was actually thousands or millions of years. Maybe different species have evolved since the time they were created by God. It wasn't until I was in my mid-20s that I learned 65 million years passed between the extinction of dinosaurs and the appearance of men on Earth. At the time, I was certain that at least cavemen coexisted with dinosaurs, and upon learning this wasn't the case, I interrogated this belief of mine to find that it had formed purely on the basis of Flintstones commercials and Far Side comics. What fundamentalists didn't and don't understand is that evolution is the theory that species have evolved out of other species over vast periods of time, and that new traits are developed as the species adapts to its environment. As someone raised in evangelical fundamentalist churches and schools, I can confirm that the same "man comes from monkeys" line that spurred the Scopes trial is the same premise still commonly held and parroted from older community members to impressionable younger ones. It wasn't until I'd been out of the fundy bubble for over a decade that I began to be able to even try to wrap my head around the understanding of humans sharing a common ancestors with chimps versus directly descending from them. In an article written for phys.org in 2016, Paula Cover of the University of Bath writes, humans and chimpanzees share more than 90% of their genetic sequence, but this common ancestor which roamed the earth approximately 7 million years ago was neither a monkey nor a human, but an ape-like creature that recent research suggests had traits that favored the use of tools. Because of how intimately connected I was to the evangelical fundamentalist community, I know that scientific concepts involving the mention of 7 million years ago will immediately put many of them off from this discussion outright due to their belief that Earth is only around 6,000 years old. While there are many Christians who are able to reconcile creationism and evolution to coexist within their framework of belief, this is not possible for fundamentalists. Because of the bubble I was raised in, I've never taken a science class that wasn't presented through a religious lens. The majority of my early years out in the real world were spent just trying to survive and make sense of a cultural reality diametrically opposed to the one I'd been raised in. I didn't have the time or energy to teach myself science. It was on a trip to the Natural History Museum in Los Angeles in my mid-20s that I was jarred into the deep and burning need to learn the truth about the world and science. 65 million years between dinosaurs and man was just the beginning. I didn't know it then, but that day was my entry point into what would later culminate in a complete deconstruction of fundamentalist Christianity and then Christianity as a whole. For as long as I could remember, it had been the Christian calling, and therefore my family's calling, to be in the world but not of the world. Yes, we were on earth for a time, but that time was to be short, very short. In fact, Jesus would certainly be returning to scoop up all of the Christians into the air to join him in heaven very soon. Most likely tomorrow. Death was never something I needed to concern myself with, and by proxy, neither was life. Throughout my deconstruction, I learned so many mind-blowing truths about the world that were never mentioned in the bubble in which I was raised. The reality of Earth being around 4.5 billion years old is inconceivable to fundamentalists. The fact that there are stories in the first book of the Bible that are established on myths from earlier societies is something I had never heard of until I made the conscious decision to completely deconstruct from the belief system in which I was raised. I was taught at home, school, and church multiple times a week that Moses wrote the book of Genesis. Despite the scholarship demonstrating Genesis to be a collection of writings by multiple authors, the Moses authorship is still professed in Christian spaces the world over. I have a lot more to say about Moses, but that's a topic I'll have to save for another week. And now we've come to the part of the pod where I talk about the books I've been reading lately. Okay, this first one, I don't know if I can fully recommend it. I like the plot. This book is called Leave the World Behind, and the reason I picked it up is because it's coming out on Netflix next month as a movie. I really liked the plot. The ending was extremely interesting. However, I personally just don't need sex scenes in books, especially sex scenes that are written really awkwardly. I don't know, the writing was a little strange because it seemed like at some points, like the way the mom was thinking about her teenage son was kind of sexual and off-putting, and the way she would think about her 13-year-old daughter was that she was fat and a baby, and I just I didn't care for that character. But the idea behind the plot, which I'm not going to talk about because that's kind of the whole thing, it was interesting to me. And I mean, the reason I read it is because the trailer of the movie looked interesting, and I really like to read things before I see the movies. All that to say, maybe just wait and see the movie. I don't know. I liked the book. I was able to skim over the stuff I didn't want to read. I'll just leave this one at a you do you, but don't tell anybody I recommended it. The next book I read is the third in the series of the queer romantic novels I was talking about last time. This one's called Iris Kelly Doesn't Date, and she's the last one in the friend group to get her own story. I think this book was probably my favorite. The first was my favorite for a long time, but this one, Iris's romantic interest is named Stevie, and I really related to that character because she has generalized anxiety disorder. And she has a lot of hang-ups and a hard time with certain things that I have hang-ups and a hard time with. Again, I highly recommend this series by Ashley Herring Blake to anyone who enjoys queer romance with happy endings. The last book I read this past week was called Jesus Before the Gospels. Of course, another Bart Ehrman book. The reason I picked this one up is because I'm currently working on my series for this channel that's going to come out every Friday in December. It's called Deconstructing Christmas. I'll have a trailer coming out for that soon. But Jesus Before the Gospels talks about the oral tradition of Jesus's life and teachings and miracles that was going on before the Gospels were ever written. And I highly recommend it the same way I recommend every Ehrman book. He takes really complex theological concepts and discussions that have hundreds of years of backstory and makes it very easy for people to read who don't have a history in, deep theological reading. Anyway, I totally recommend that one too. If you'd like to support me, please go ahead and subscribe to my channel and hit the notification button so that you can find out whenever I have a new video that comes out. If you could take the time to like this video, I would greatly appreciate that. If you'd like to support me financially, you can find me over at buymeacoffee.com/assignedxtian, where I happily take one-time and then also monthly donations for perks. I hope you all have a wonderful week, and I will catch you next weekend. Okay, bye!